Hey up lads and lasses, Damphyre here, back again with some more Infinite Lagrange. Today we are looking back at the tier maker. I finally got the majority of cruisers tested, with the exception of one or two. But you can generally tell from what the strategy changes or what the changes were with the weapon tech, how they're gonna perform. So it's not too bad there. Namely speaking, it was the CAS auxiliary. That was the one that I couldn't test properly myself, but I have actually got some reports of it in use in fleets. So yeah, I can humbly say pretty easily that it's still absolutely overpowered. Anyway, we're going to start from situational and work our way up, going through the categories as we did before. Again, apologies about this taking quite a while, but the cruisers had to be tested a bit more extensively than previously, and it's mostly because the meta switch currently is into heavier fleets, so cruisers are a lot more valuable in that sense. And now with some of the changes, they're definitely more than viable within fleet. And yeah, they are very TP intensive though, so bear that in mind. You won't be running most of these cruisers early on, but the more veteran players will definitely be running cruisers in fleet, because they do now provide a good amount of tank, good amount of damage. In some cases, utility on some of them is really good as well. So yeah, anyway, the IO Siege variant is going to stay in situational. For the most part, the only thing that really changed is it got even more siege damage, so it kills buildings even faster. It is markedly better, and even more so with the new outposts and stuff that you can get, because those big armored outposts and stuff like that have a lot of HP and a lot of armor, so IO Siege is going to be really useful to trying to take those down and sort of stop a frontline push or push onto somebody's front line and remove those outposts that they have up for defensive purposes. So the IO Siege staying in situational because it really is genuinely not very good at anything else. The Light Cone AA has made a pretty big resurgence. It's genuinely really good now. The ability for it to intercept missiles and torps is outstanding on it. The buff to aircraft is also really good, allows it to go into pretty much any fleet, and because of that, you know, anti-missiles that it can run. It's also the only ship with the ability to intercept flanking fleets missiles as well, so it can actually potentially save a hell of a lot of damage incoming on your fleet, especially with the likes of Callisto heavy torps and stuff. If they lose one of their torps, it's a massive damage debuff on them. So they are surprisingly good. They have a mediocre tank. I wouldn't personally run these on the front line though. They have the ability to be moved to the front line, but I'd run them mid-row. The AA on them is arguably one of the better AA ships. However, they still don't quite do what the Winged Hussar does in terms of AA damage, but they are just bringing quite a lot in as well. So with that being said, they are moving from situational because I believe they can literally fit in any type of fleet you want now, and you can definitely, even running like 2, 3, 4 is plenty, and because of that, I am going to move them up to the top of A tier. We then move into the KCPVs. We have the integrated first. It got a negligible strat buff, so did the pulse, and so did the railgun. Unfortunately, this does put them in a position where they are still really bad, and they're staying in D tier for that reason. The Predator AA, I actually misjudged this a little bit. It's probably better than the generic slightly. So it's going to get moved up into B tier. They got an aircraft hit rate buff. It's got more AA damage output on it now. It also has intercept, which is actually quite nice in the back row. So it can potentially run some intercept and knock out missiles and reduce enemy fleet damage. So again, Probably misjudged it the first time round, and yeah, it's going to go up into B tier due to that. The Jaeger HC, it got more damage versus cruisers, but less versus everything else after removing 30% of its damage. And unfortunately, that, if anything, makes it worse than it currently is. And I'm going to be moving that down into D tier. Its only redeeming feature is the strategy, but you can get that on the HC Carillion as well, which is far cheaper CP costs. And it ends up probably doing about a similar sort of damage to Jaeger CP to CP cost. So Jaeger HC, it's pretty trash at the moment. Callisto UAV, the AA damage got buffed. It needs to be tested a bit more. This is one of the ones that I unfortunately couldn't get around to testing as much as I wanted to. But saying that, I am going to move it up into B tier. It's going to be the end of B tier though. Its UAVs can provide sort of back row wide UAV coverage, and it does reasonable AA in that aspect. It's also bringing standard Callisto torps at the same time, so it is a decent damage dealer as well. So we are moving that up to B. The CAS, it got an aircraft hit rate buff and the strat buff for more AA. It doesn't really do that much AA. It's pretty bad. And honestly, there are just better ships to run aircraft on in general. I'm going to move it down to the end of C. If you desperately need it because you don't have anything better to run it on, the CAS will fill that role. But literally anything is almost better than the CAS for aircraft support. We then move over to the Chimera Defensive. It got pretty much negligible strat buff, so we're not even going to mention it properly. The damage decrease hurts it quite a lot. The only benefit was its HP increases, and it does put it into a point where it can tank quite nicely. So it's not bad. It's still just not good for the CP, and you can get better mid-row tanks. Arguably, you can use the system thing to push it into the front row, but that's system specific, and I don't want to talk too much about that kind of thing. And for its CP cost, you can do something similar with a spear, which comes front row anyway, with more HP than what 2 Chimera can do for less CP. So, it's just not a good ship, to be honest with you. It looks good on paper, high armor, good HP, especially for a cruiser. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just not great. The Connemara Chaos Railgun, the strat buff on it was very negligible, and unfortunately, it didn't really do anything for it. If anything, this got hit really hard from its 30% damage buff, because 30% of 1400 alpha on it. Yeah, you can imagine it's really quite suffering now, unfortunately. It is, however, still better than the Jaeger HC, so it's going to stay within C tier. Over into B, we got a big hit rate buff for the IO ion cannon. It doesn't affect the missiles. The missiles were pretty standard buffs there. So it is kind of staying, I think, in B. The problem with it is it can't take the damage too well. It's still front row. It does decent damage output. And with the advent of heavier fleets with more cruisers being in them, it fits better in fleet now. But its damage output to the amount of tank it can take, it's just not good enough, and it's going to sit in the middle at B. Chimera Ballistic is unfortunately another one hit really hard. There was a cooldown decrease on its strategy, which doesn't affect it whatsoever. Literally, basically, the only thing this has received is a 30% damage debuff. It didn't get anything to try and counteract that at all. At least with the IO, that hit rate buff against cruisers and above is going to allow you to deal more damage output, or more consistent damage output, because of how the ion systems work on ships. So a little bit unfortunate, but yeah, there you go. Chimera is unfortunately moving down the ranks. I don't think it's C tier. but I believe I'm going to put it at the end of B tier for the base variant. Light Cone generic. Again, it's got the base hit rate of UAV increases and a missile hit rate increase. It's not bad, it's doing okay. The hit rate debuff hurts it a little bit, but nowhere near as much as something like the Chimera, where the alpha is quite a bit higher. The Light Cone's more of a rapid fire, lots of missiles kind of thing, so the missiles are lower damage in the first place. The 30% damage increases didn't matter too much to it. So I believe it's still in the right position at the moment, and it's going to stay there. The Cass Arty. Massive crit damage buff, like huge. Out of all of the changes to the cruisers, the two biggest winners are the IO anti-ship and the Cass Artillery. The Cass Artillery, yeah, it lost 30% damage, it did suck, but the damage increase it got from the crit buff it received is humongous, and it can dish out absurd amounts of damage, let alone if it's an enemy frigate. It just decimates front row. It doesn't matter. It's really strong now and worth a look at. I think it is better than the base IO. Have a look at the Cass Artillery variant. It's worth checking out for certain. The base Cass, or the integrated type, got a strat duration increase. It's quite nice because of it being a torp system, and it kind of stays where it is because of that. There's nothing more to really say here. It's a mid-play ship. It's completely fine where it is. Early game, you'll be running loads of Cass, and they are decent. Later on, you'll probably replace them when you find better ships and variants. And it's just how it is. You might get the Arty type, and then you've got like an instant increase. It is to know that, you know, all of these you can build like 12 of, which is actually also quite nice. We then have the Predator generic. I need to move this one straight away because it is worse than the Predator AA, which is a little bit unfortunate. You generally don't see many Predators anymore within fleets, and it's generally due to the fact that corvettes are slightly better, and a lot of the fighters and bombers and stuff you need a large slot for that you want to be running, and they're going on the carriers, so you don't really see too many Predators. Most of the time you might see maybe 2 of in fleet, and that's to run the Hayridden Loyals. And after the Hayridden Loyal nerf, which is huge, wait till I get to the fighters and bombers next week hopefully. Yeah, the Predator generic is going down to the top of C tier. It's unfortunately, it didn't receive any major buffs that make it, you know, particularly viable to increase its, you know, ability to carry better or anything like that. Yeah, it got I believe it was a hit rate, aircraft hit rate buff, but it's a negligible buff at the end of the day. Compared to what you'd usually run it for. So I'm going to drop it down to C tier. Run the Predator AA variant if you've got it. Run the Predator Tactical if you've got it. They are both far superior to the Predator generic. We are then moving on to the KCCPV aircraft. Likewise, this is going to get dropped down. I'm going to put it above the Predator generic, and the only reason I'm doing so is because early on, when you're new to the game, you get the KCPV. It has the only large hangar, allowing you to bring in bombers out of everything except carriers. So it's got some utility there still, and it still works quite nicely in a siege fleet with bullfrogs in it. So it's still a bit more viable than the Predator generic in my opinion. Callisto AA and the Chimera Ballistic. Do I want to move these up? I actually believe the Callisto UAV is going to perform better than the integrated. It won't probably perform better than the Light Cone generic, however. The Chimera Ballistic stays at the back of B. Is it slightly better than the Predator AA? No, the Predator AA's got more utility. So, moving up to A tier, we have the Callisto. base variant, it got more damage versus cruisers, and it got sort of nuked to it's not good anymore. Unfortunately, the damage hit on it really hurts, and the like of light cone AA becoming more prevalent in fleets because of that ability to just neuter the damage out of a Callisto or any of the other missile ships. Yeah, the Callisto's fallen from grace pretty harsh. I'm actually going to drop it down to the bottom of B tier. The top of B tier. The Callisto base variant is no longer particularly good anymore. Even the Callisto UAV version. If I'm putting the Callisto UAVs there, it's behind that. So there we go. Yeah, unfortunately, Callisto got hit really damn hard. So 30% damage reduction. The Callisto UAV actually provides air support as well as, some damage output, and its damage wasn't too far behind the base Callisto, so this is why it's moving up to the B tier. The Callisto's moving down to B, and the UAV's moving above the base Callisto, because it just provides at least some utility as well as basically the same damage output. I saw maybe like a 5-10% difference between the Callisto's damage output and the UAV version's damage output, so it really wasn't much. And like I said, they both suffer immensely if you see any form of intercept in fleet, which sucks. Chimera Heavy Cannon. Out of all the Chimeras, this one did the best. Again, it got a cooldown decrease on its strat, which sucks. It's like, of all of the buffs that happened with the weapon tech changes, that is the worst of like all of them. So unfortunately, the Chimera HC has just flat out lost its damage output, 30% of its damage output basically, to get a slight strat buff, and it's so slight and negligible, it basically didn't really do anything for it. It is still good damage output, it is still a good front row tank, and because of that, it's a nice off tank. So it's going to stay in A, but it's going to the back of A tier at the moment. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Now, the light cone assault. It got more damage and a hit rate on UAV buff, which is actually quite nice. Its AA potential isn't as good as, say, the light cone AA. It doesn't intercept either. I don't think it intercepts. It definitely doesn't intercept anywhere near as well. It has, however, got decent damage output. Again, it's one of those ones where it's got loads and loads of missiles, so that 30% decrease of damage didn't hit it as hard as, say, something like the Callisto does. So the light cone assault, thankfully, is going to stay up in A. I am going to be moving it backwards a little bit, though, for the time being. I think it's quite mid-row in A. It's definitely not as good as the light cone AA, so the assault's going to go to mid. It's got better damage output than the Callisto's now, so there's something to know. Light cone assault, better than base Callisto and Callisto UAV. We are then moving over onto the IOB. It got a massive buff. It goes to, I think, 61% evasion against Frigg Destroyer fleets. It genuinely does more damage output than it did before. It's fantastic on the front line. It's going up to S tier. I was running 4 of these within my fleet last server for the majority of the server because the buff it got is disgusting. Against swarm fleets, the IO anti-ship, I was knocking out all the air with my standard fleet anti-aircraft setup that I usually run. The IO anti-ship, 4 of in fleet, in a 2-minute battle where I did 2 million damage, it was doing a quarter of my entire damage output with just 4 of them. Let alone the fact that it stood on the front line and they really struggle to get any damage output on it whatsoever. So yeah, IO anti-ship, way more than meta now. It even does decent damage against cruisers and stuff. It's just an all-round fantastic ship. Again, against that swarm fleet, which is free destroyer prevalent, it will absolutely and utterly murder them. It's fantastic. Definitely check out the IO anti-ship. It is up into S tier finally, which I'm actually kind of pleased about because I actually quite like it. It's a cool looking ship. And you know, the performance is definitely there as well. We then move on to the Jaeger. The hit rate for vets increase. Obviously, it's had, you know, the ability to focus carriers removed. It's now just anything that's super capital. So it generally forces your aircraft to attack the likes of battle crews and stuff first, which unfortunately are extremely tanky now, where the ones that people tend to use, the SD-59 and the Spears, are quite prevalent at the moment. So I'm actually going to drop the Jaeger down, and it's going to go down to the top of B tier. It is still viable, but it's very mid-tier in its carrying potential now, especially after, you know, losing its ability to prioritize carriers. Its damage output on its by itself is negligible. It doesn't really do anything. Its aircraft potential is okay at best. There are just flat out better corvette carriers now in the game. Even I'd say the dual purpose Guardian is a better use than the Jaeger because of the fact that the Jaeger can't really force carrier targeting anymore. Similar things happen to the Predators, and this is also one of the contributions that I decided to move them down, is they just don't function like they used to, and I just don't think they're worth running in fleet for carrier potential. And personally, I think Swarm is very close to on its way out. My fleet decimates Swarm, and there's nothing they can do about it at the end of the day. And that fleet that I'm running, that hybrid fleet, it's still early on. People are still testing and new fits out for them and new fleets out for them, and they just get better and better, and Swarm is just not keeping up, I don't feel. Predator Tactical, it got a lovely 10% increase in its ability to, you know, increase hit rates. It's still got that carrying capacity of 4 mediums. The hit rate buff is the thing that's keeping it, I think, in A tier, but it's going to go right down to the end of A tier. I generally think that the series tactical may be worth running over it now, just for the CP cost, because you, instead of running 2 Predators, you could have 4 series. But actually, no, it's more than that. It's like 5 or 6 series tacticals, and they'll do pretty much exactly the same thing. Even more so because they'll have more UAVs out than the Predator Tacticals, 2 of them would. So considering that as well, actually, I might move it down to the top of B tier. The Predators and the cruisers for carrying now are just not what they used to be. And like I said, Swarm is just not, it's not really prevalent if you look at the top end PvPers. They're not running them that much anymore. We then move over onto the Connie Plasma. The Overdrive got a massive buff on the strat, and it's definitely worth running. With the prevalence of light cones and stuff in fleet as well, which are killing, you know, missiles, and they're also killing off air quite efficiently. Connemara Chaos's Plasma, which can't be intercepted, it's a fantastic damage dealer in that back row, and it's going to remain in A tier because of that. And it's definitely one of the better damage dealers in fleets at the moment, if you do see them running. Definitely check out the strat on it. It's worth running now for certain. It just oozes out tons of damage, and it's quite fun. I ran 2 of these in fleet, and they were roughly doing about half what my IO anti-ship were doing. So 4 IO, 2 Connies. So it's pretty efficient, that in terms of damage output. They do, however, struggle a little bit more against Frig Desi, but this is why I ran 2 of them in my fleet. So my anti-IO anti-ship would take the front line the Connemara Chaos in the back row in case the IO drop, which they never did, and also the Connies for, you know, hitting any of the bigger ships will do more damage than the IO Type B, that is. So yeah, fantastic ship. Definitely check out the Connemara Chaos Plasma, and it's a good ship. It's also a good looking ship, so you got that benefit going on there as well. Moving on up to S tier, the Callisto Heavy Torp is getting dropped down into A tier and behind the Light Cone AA. Light Cone AA, new is the Callisto's damage output. There's a few ships that can absolutely neuter its damage output. Thunderbolt with the intercept setup, it can. I've seen the Thunderbolt intercept, like one of Thunderbolt, neuter a fleet of Callisto's damage by 66%. It's nasty, and that's one Thunderbolt. You can imagine what 4 or 5 Light Cones do in a fleet to the Callisto's Heavy Torp's damage output. And like I said, they are prevalent in fleet now. If you look at some of the top players that are running at the moment and their fleet designs, you will see them. They are running 2 to 4 Light Cone in every single one of their fleets, be it the Immortal fleet, the Hybrid fleet, even inside of the likes of their Swarm or like Hybrid Swarm fleet, there's Light Cone. And due to this, the Callisto's damage output is just dropped off so drastically, plus a 30% debuff to it. And all it got in return was a 5% damage increase against against battle cruisers, I think, only. And generally speaking, if you're running one of those super heavy fleets with battle cruisers in it, you run Light Cone in there for, well, partially AA, but more the intercept. And yeah, Callisto Heavy Torps, it's lost the crown, unfortunately, and I think it deserves it. It's been top since the start of the game in cruises. In terms of damage output, it's been the best out of every ship, and yeah, not anymore. It's been countered by the meta changes and a 30% damage nerf. Anyway, onto the CAS auxiliary, and this thing needs a nerf really, really badly. I've seen 12 of these in a fleet, and I have 1 million plus DPM in that fleet, and I couldn't break the tank because of the CAS auxiliary's heal capability, and that was prior to it receiving a 5% passive buff and an extra 10% heal buff on top of that. So yeah, the CAS auxiliary support is absolutely ridiculous. There's not much I can say about it. In the big Immortal fleets, the CAS is pretty much just keeping spears and stuff alive. Doesn't matter how much you throw at them, and you can either pin an opponent down for 20-30 minutes with taking negligible damage because you don't have much damage output, or you know, they eventually just have to retreat from you, and even that's just viable because that's them spending more CP than you to try and get back out, and you never know, they might be the other side of the frigging galaxy, near the AMP or something. So yeah, the CAS support, it definitely needs a nerf. Honestly, it's got way too much healing potential in the right fleet design. Interesting to note, in things with the IO anti-ship, the Type B, if you do come against that Frig Desi fleet and you have CAS auxiliary, the CAS auxiliary can out heal the Frig Desi's fire on the IO because of its dodge rate plus the heal coming in from the Augs. It's yeah, definitely have a look at the CAS support if you've got it. If you have got it, run it, put your tech points into it. You just need to get the heal and the tank on it, and it's done. It's like 60 TP or something around there to get it running at a maximum efficiency. You don't need to do the AA on it, it's not good. Just get the tank on it, get the heal on it, and it will just out-healed pretty much. Ridiculous damage numbers. So there you go. If you are struggling against sort of the big pay-to-win whales and stuff like that, and you have cast support, throw them into a big defense fleet with chimeras and IOs and that kind of thing, and throw all 12 into them, and throw it into the paywall that is the whales, and they'll hate you forever because they won't be able to kill it either. You need absurd damage output to break 12 Cassocs in a fleet. That, add in Light Cone AA, it's, don't even talk about it. It's nasty. So there you go. That is a big meta swing for the cruisers. It's nice to see that cruisers are now pretty used, prevalent within the game. If you haven't seen my hybrid fleet, go check that out. I start running battle cruisers and cruisers in fleet with a smaller amount of swarm, and you can see what it does. I think it's against a swarm fleet as well, so you can see what it does against basic swarm and its damage output and potential, and its, you know, staying power is really quite strong now. So yeah, there you have it. That's it for today. Sorry this one took so long. Thankfully we are back on our standard schedule, so this will be releasing Thursday at least, and should be from now onwards, unless they start just dismantling my flat again. So there you go. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.